This is going to require some alcohol. Okay, so hi, I'm going to show you how converted and added damage works. So we can take all the things we learned in the previous videos and I've kind of apply them to this one. So, first, this will be pretty calculation heavy because each type or each source of damage follows its own little damage path, I guess. So there's a lot of calculations. And the main rule is that increases and multipliers only apply to their relevant stats, and they only apply once. So say I had, a hybrid damage attack, no conversions, just, flat physical, or just flat physical, flat cold, flat lightning, and then I held all these increases. As you can see, some increases only apply to certain things. Like physical damage increases only apply to physical damage, cold damage increases only apply to cold damage. So say I had a general type of damage like simply increased damage, it would apply to all three. If I had something like increased weapon elemental damage, it would apply to all the weapon elemental damage types, which would be cold, lightning, and fire. So they would both get that bonus. Or if I had increased elemental damage as a whole, which could also apply to spells at that point. This is just a hybrid damage attack, so it's a weapon elemental damage attack. But as you can see, the physical damage portion, because it's very easy to get a whole lot of increased physical damage types of nodes off the tree and also off of skill gems. You can see that the final multiplier you get down here for the increased, like along here, is significantly higher than the elemental damage types that you have available to you. So you can do something like converting your damage out of physical damage to get these bonuses to also apply to your elemental damage attacks. So the main idea is that you convert damage out so it gets more bonuses from more types of things. So yeah, that's the idea. So we get into converted damage types. So converted damage increases multipliers only apply once, and converted damage benefits from all the things that affect any part of the conversion. So say if you had a physical damage attack, that would get all the bonuses from physical damage. If you had a cold damage attack, that would only get all the things that benefit cold damage. But if you had a physical damage attack that was converted into cold damage, it would get all the benefits from physical damage and cold damage. So say we have a single conversion attack, so there's only one conversion happening. That's 50% of the physical damage converted goes to fire, and that's from the source of the Infernal Blow gem. So we have a small source of physical damage, we have a little bit of physical damage here, and half of it gets converted out. So half of our physical damage is now gone. We don't get it anymore as physical damage, but it's been converted over to fire damage. We didn't have a source of flat fire damage, so it was the only source of fire damage we have is from the Infernal Blow gem. We also have cold and lightning damage as well. So if we follow down this whole track, so we have increased physical, increased melee physical, physical damage with one-handers, and all of that also applies to the Infernal Blow attack from the fire damage that's converted out. But the fire damage also gets the benefits from the weapon elemental damage and increased fire damage, which the melee attack or the regular physical damage attack didn't get. So the biggest multiplier you can get is from the converted damage type, because the straight flat elemental damages don't get the benefits from any of the physical damage types, and the physical damage doesn't get any of the benefits from the elemental damage types, but the converted damage gets the benefits from both of those. So it's a much higher multiplier for the increased multiplier. So the final multiplier is a lot higher for that type. Also, there are certain gems that also apply to the physical damage portion, or the fire damage portion of the Infernal Blow attack. Like the weapon elemental damage gem gets applied to the fire damage portion, as you would expect. But in addition, but what also happens is that the melee physical damage gem, if you're also using that, also gets applied. So instead of having a tiny multiplier at the end, so the physical damage has a 8.5 multiplier, the cold and lightning have around a 5.5 multiplier each, but then the fire damage from the infernal blow conversion gets a pretty insane, yeah, about a 16 damage, 16 times damage multiplier. So you can really see that using conversion sources is a really strong way of buffing some sources of damage. So we can kind of apply this to a lightning arrow build. So this is a faulty calculation, and the fault lies right here. So this is a lightning arrow build. It uses more than 100% converted damage. So we have a 25% physical damage converted to cold from the Hrimsar gloves, 50% converted to lightning from the lightning arrow gem, and 50 physical converted to fire from the black flame quiver. But that's 125% of physical damage being converted out. So there's an issue here. So that's resolved by taking the physical damage portion that's being taken out. So we have 50% being converted, and that's being divided by the total amount of conversion over 100. So we have 0.5 divided by 1.25 because there's 125% conversion happening. So in the end, the total amount of damage you have to start with for the flat amount of damage is the same as the total converted damage you have to end with. So we started with 220 damage, we end with 220 damage after all the conversions happen. That's how it works. So you can't convert more than what you already have. You end up with the same even if you try to convert more than you actually have. It just gets pulled together, or it just gets divided equally between all the sources that are trying to take more than they can from it. So, what does this all mean? And why is this calculation faulty? So we have cold damage, and then the cold damage gets converted to fire damage. That's wrong. So we have cold damage, and then there's extra cold damage being applied from the physical damage being converted to cold damage. So we have extra cold damage here, and we have flat lightning damage we get from beer, and then we also have lightning damage that we get converted from physical damage. And we don't have any fire damage flat from any gear or other sources, but we do have the converted damage. So we get all these converted damage types, and then we follow the line down for all the things that apply to them. So now we have increased physical damage, that gets applied to everything, projectile damage gets applied to everything, bow physical damage gets applied to everything, because everything's a physical damage, everything starts as physical damage, ends up as elemental damage, so it gets the benefits from physical and elemental. So, it also gets the benefits from weapon elemental damage, although the base physical damage doesn't, although we don't do any physical damage after all the conversions happen. So, cold gets cold, lightning gets lightning, fire gets fire, and then everything gets just increased damage from whatever sources are increased damage, like the Laherp de Derp or the Chain Gem, or what's another one? That one strange aura helmet that provides just increased damage. So we get a bunch of these increased multipliers, and we're multiplying that by all the gem multipliers. And as you can see, the physical damage portion, if we didn't do any of these things, is much smaller. But we don't have any physical damage, so we don't care about that part. So, but this is a faulty calculation, and I'll tell you why in the next example. And it lies within these 4 cells right here, or more specifically, these 2 cells right here. So, the correct version would be to separate the converted cold damage. So we have 25% of physical being converted to cold, 25%, 50% of physical being converted to lightning. But the problem is that the flat lightning damage you get off of gear and other stuff. So the lightning damage comes from lightning damage, doesn't come from physical damage. So we have just the lightning damage. This converted cold damage and this converted lightning damage comes from physical damage. So it gets those benefits from physical damage. But these other sources of cold and lightning damage don't get any benefit from the physical damage portions. So what actually needs to happen is these need to be split into their own separate groups. So this source of lightning damage doesn't get these extra benefits, and this source of cold damage doesn't get these extra sources of benefits. But this source of cold and lightning damage, they get the extra benefits from all these other things. So if we follow the whole line down, yada 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 yada, increased damage, all that other good stuff, everything gets its own increases. You can see that at the end, after everything's being applied, the converted damage sources get about a 50% damage bonus from all the other things for just being able to have access to the extra types of damage nodes. That's not correct. That should be that. That should be that. Bam. It's better. Not 50%, like 30% extra damage from just the fact that it's converted damage and it has access to more types of increased damage and also more access to the other types of gems that affect it. So the last example. This is a multiple step conversion, so this is saying an attack uses, say, 50% of damage, or 50% of physical damage converted to fire, but then also 25% of that fire damage is converted to chaos damage. So once again, all the sources of damage follow their own track, down to being calculated for their final amounts. And I've tested this whole thing with a character, and this has been proven to be correct. So with this character, I have some sword with fire damage on it, an amulet with fire damage, a ring with physical damage, and some gloves with fire damage. I also have increased fire damage on my gear somewhere, so I've accounted for all those things. So we're going to keep track of this and calculate that out at the end. So we have our flat sources of damage. We have 164 physical damage for our top end and 110 fire damage for our top end. So we have yada yada yada. And after we convert half of it out with Infernal Blow, we have 82 physical damage and 82.5 fire damage. So the conversion process reduces the amount of total fire damage we get from our gear. So we start with 110, and after it's converted to chaos, we only have 82 left. But now we have to deal with all the other conversion types. So 50% of physical damage is converted to fire damage. So the converted damage we get, since I'm using the added fire damage gem, so half of the physical damage is converted to fire, but then I also get the extra bonus of that plus 0.36 from the added fire damage gem. And that doesn't remove any damage from the physical damage portion. It's only additive. But it's not, say like half the damage is converted out, it's not then multiplied by that. It's just like one straight calculation that happens at one time. So all of it happens at once. So that's how that all works, which is why we get 141 flat fire damage for our straight physical to fire conversion. But then you have to account for the fact that 25% of that physical damage is also being converted to chaos damage by the Troll Mantle. So you have to account for that. So that's being converted over to that. Great. So once again, all these conversions follow their own track. They follow their own track down and account for everything along the way that would affect them. So this fire damage that's converted from our gear, which this is just our flat fire damage off of things. Like it doesn't start as physical, then it gets converted out. It just starts as fire damage, and then it gets converted to chaos damage. So it only gets the benefits of the fire damage types of nodes. So it gets increased fire damage, it gets increased elemental damage, it gets increased weapon elemental damage. So finally we have our last stat, and that's our final damage is 80 from that source of damage. But then we have our physical damage portion, which gets converted to fire, which then gets our physical damage portion, which gets converted to fire, which then gets converted, a portion of that gets converted to chaos, which picks up more types of damage increases. So it gets increased physical and increased melee physical damage from strength. And then we follow that all down. We find out that the at portion accounts for 181 chaos damage. And if we check all of this, the math, done it correctly, main hand does 106 to 262, that's the key stat, 262 chaos damage, which is exactly in line with the math here. And this is exactly how converted damage works. We can also check the other portions, so we should have a final damage of 239 physical damage, which we have 239 physical damage, and we should have 786 fire damage, which is 787 fire damage. So I guess I'm a little bit off there from whatever errors. And this is exactly how converted damage works. A little bit confusing, but just think of it as each source, whenever every single thing comes from a source, and that source follows some sort of track down and picks up all the increases and all the modifiers that affect it along the way. So the more things you can do to make it, take in more of those increases. So say if you could have something that would convert like physical damage to cold damage, then convert that cold damage to fire damage, then convert that fire damage to chaos damage, and then you could somehow pick up all the increased fire damage nodes, increased chaos damage, increased elemental damage, increased physical damage, and that multiplier in the end would be very, very high. So as you can see from this little portion here, the total multiplier you can get for these converted portions is extremely high. Like these converted physical damage portions have around a 30 or 40% more per, they get about 30-40% more damage from them, simply from all the extra damage nodes you can pick up along the way that affect them. So this is converted damage. It's really confusing. Don't feel bad of being lost with this stuff, but that's how it works. And the spreadsheet will be linked in the description, and you can use this and check it out, and save your own copy of it and modify it as you please. So I'm Yuda, and I'll see you next time.